What's going on, guys? Eric Pate here, back with another video. Before I went to bed last night, I got to thinking about an air crash that shouldn't have been controversial. There are plane crashes that there are controversial things about them, and this one I don't understand. Like TWA 800, that was pretty controversial for about until the NTSB proved to the FBI that the plane was not taken down by a bomb or a missile. So, but this one is still controversial to this day, and it shouldn't be, because there's more than enough evidence to prove what I'm going to say, actually, to prove what I actually think happened. There's more than enough evidence to prove it, to prove what happened on Silk Air Flight 185. So Silk Air Flight 185 is flying from Jakarta, Indonesia to Hong Kong. I knew for a fact it was flying to Hong Kong, but so I was watching the TikToks. But I think it originated in Jakarta. I know for a fact it originated. Yes, Jakarta. Okay, I was wrong. It wasn't Hong Kong. It was going to Singapore. But I was right about it originating in Jakarta. But anyway, so this was about towards the end of the 90s, I think. 97. So what was suspected was there was a rudder malfunction. Now, I would add this one thing. In the 90s, 91, 94, and 96, 3 different 737s had some type of rudder malfunction. The one, United 585, US Air 427, and Eastwind 517, all 3 of them had a rudder malfunction. Flight 517 was the only one of those 3 that actually managed to land safely. The other 2, unfortunately, crashed. All 3 flights were on approach, by the way. So anyway, again, let's talk about it. So let's talk about the flight in question, Silk Air 185. Why did I bring up those 3 rudder malfunctions? Because at first, that was the first thing that was suspected, was there was a rudder malfunction. Okay, so the captain, and also back then, doors on cockpits, they were allowed to be open. Now they're not, because of what happened on September 11th, 2001. And also back then, there can only be 1 pilot in cockpit ever since now the crash of Germanwings 9525. There can also be 1 person in cockpit, but after Germanwings, there has to be 2 at all times. So if a pilot has to get up and use the lavatory, a flight attendant has to take over while the captain or first officer uses the restroom because of the crash. So the pilot's left in the cockpit doesn't try to do anything. So why did I bring up Flight 9525? Because what caused the crash in 9525 is what I think actually happened on Silk Air 185. So anyway, so the captain left the cockpit. On his way out, he disconnected the cockpit voice recorder. first red flag. I'm like, because this wasn't, when I was watching this episode of Air Disasters, I knew immediately that pilot suicide had to be involved. The first officer was still, while the captain was away, the first officer, though, was actually still communicating with air traffic control. So I knew. So immediately, when pilot suicide was suspected in this case, that first officer was immediately ruled out. Because normally in pilot suicide situations, the pilot committing the act would not talk to air traffic control, as they're supposed to. And that's exactly what happened in this case. The first officer was communicating with air traffic control as they're supposed to. On just a short 1.5-hour flight from Jakarta over to Singapore. Then the captain came back and told the first officer that there was something that he needs to go check out. He shut the door and locked it the first officer left. Then he disconnected the flight data recorder. Our alarms immediately went off. Because when the flight data recorder gets disconnected, when the flight data recorder gets disconnected, alarms are going to go off in the cockpit. And if he had the first officer in the cockpit, the first officer will reconnect the flight data recorder, possibly also reconnect your cockpit voice recording. I knew, like I said, I knew when I saw the cockpit voice recording being disconnected, I knew it was going to be pilot suicide. And then, after he disconnected the flight data recorder, Captain pushed the nose forward, disconnected the autopilot, pushed the nose of the plane forward, and then used the rudder trim, too, to make it look like it was a rudder malfunction. I crashed the plane. But in the rudder, the tail fin disintegrated from the aircraft while the plane was plunging into the river. And when they looked at the tail section, there was plenty of evidence that the jack screw that controls the rudder, there was plenty of evidence that it was manipulated by something in the cockpit. So it was showing that the rudder was working at the time of the crash. And this happened to be on the 18th anniversary when the captain cheated death. He and a couple of his buddies, they were just out flying one day. And all four of them were in separate planes, and something happened to the captain of Celcarrier 185's plane, and he had to go back. And then 2 hours later, hour later or so, all three of his buddies crashed into a mountain. So, and then there was some type of crisis going on, financial crisis going on in China, I think it was, because he was a China resident, and he knew he was affected by it, and he just recently got demoted too at Celcarrier. So, I think there was more than enough evidence to prove that pilot suicide was involved. And how they knew that, by the way, how they knew that the first officer was talking to Trevor Joel. When they went to go interview Trevor Joel, they highlight, they asked to listen to the communications. The investigators asked to listen to their traffic control side of the communications between Secure 185 and the traffic control. So really, I think there was, people were saying that there's not enough evidence to prove that there wasn't a rudder malfunction involved. I think there was more than enough evidence to prove that it was not rudder malfunction. It clearly was pilot suicide. In my personal opinion, this was a clear case of pilot suicide. There was just a lot of evidence to prove that this was pilot suicide, and people didn't want to believe it. So, anyway, that's what I gotta say about Secure 185. Like, subscribe, comment, favorite. Next could be awesome. Your Patreon with the hate. Let me know let me know in the comments what you think happened to Secure 185, and I'll see you guys later.